saying the hard stuff out loud. I mean,
yeah,
even this conversation around like how late in life I feel like I found, my authenticity or my attachment to culture. Like I still feel a little bit embarrassed about that. But I think it's again, the more you sort of challenge yourself to speaking about it, I think as with anything in life, the better you are at communicating, you're going to have stronger relationships or better quality relationships in your life that actually are fulfilling, rather than sort of just like surface level, where you don't have to actually dig anything up or connect in any sort of deep way.
Welcome to the Multiracialverse podcast. I am your host, Antonio Fernandez. And today, in episode 7 of the Multiracialverse podcast, we are honored to have a conversation with the talented entrepreneur, inspirational speaker, DJ, and host of the podcast, Life as a Gringo. Dramos, best known for his tenure as a producer and 4th chair on the nationally syndicated radio television show Breakfast Club, is a proud New Yorican who has boldly carved out his own path in the entertainment industry. With a diverse skill set that spans DJing at the prominent nightclubs across the country, producing successful music independently, and hosting his own television show airing weekly in 40-plus markets via LA TV, Dramos has proven himself to be a jack of all trades. Throughout our conversation, Dramos shares insights into his multicultural background, balancing American culture with the New Yorican heritage of his U.S.-born Puerto Rican mother and his father's loyalty as a purebred Puerto Rican born on the island. We explore themes of authenticity, helping children pursue their passions, and the challenges of growing up between cultures. Despite facing early resistance from his parents who favored a more traditional path, Dramos persevered on his journey to become an on-air personality and advocate for his community. With a purpose over paycheck mentality, he uses his platforms to deliver honest and raw commentary on the state of the world, advocating for positive change and amplifying the voices of Black and Brown communities. Join as we delve into Dramos' inspiring journey and explore the power of embracing one's cultural identity while making a meaningful impact on the world. Without further ado, let's dive into episode 7 of the Multiracialverse podcast with Dramos. Dramos, welcome to the Multiracialverse. How you doing today?
I'm good, man. Thank you for having me, and congrats on the podcast. This is awesome.
Yeah. No, I appreciate your time, and I'm sure it'll come up later too. The inspiration you were on me pursuing something like this, seeing you and your space doing it, and loving that representation was the push I needed to do something similar. So I really appreciate everything you've done for Latinx and Hispanic individuals in this space. So thank you.
Thank you, man. That's a really nice thing for you to say, man. I appreciate that.
Yeah. So, today we're here to talk to you about you, man. We'll talk, obviously, the things about the work you do and other things will come up. But, I want my audience and listeners to learn more about Dramos and your multiculturalism. Tell me a little bit about your background, your parents, where you were born, and where your parents were born, and we'll go from there.
So my parents are Puerto Rican. Dad born and raised in Puerto Rico on the island. My mom born and raised in New York, and that's where I was born as well, in New York, and then basically split time between New York and New Jersey for my upbringing. So I guess my cultural background is like New Yorican mother and then a very proud born and raised Puerto Rican in my father.
Right. And when you say split time, does that mean you went back and forth in between these, or you lived in both places?
Yeah, it was weird. So my mom was a teacher in the Bronx, and they had moved to Jersey when I was pretty young, but because we had nobody to basically, watch me or pick me up from school in New Jersey, I actually went to school in the Bronx where she taught. And so I was kind of in and out of, both worlds. We'd stay a lot with my grandmother in the Bronx throughout the week, and then I'd be home in Jersey on the weekend. So it really was literally like back and forth throughout the course of the week. And then even as an adult, I lived in Brooklyn for a short period of time, and more recently, lived literally right across the water from New York. So I kind of claim both New York and Jersey as home.
And your father lived in the States though too, right? With your mom, you all lived in Jersey together.
Yeah, so my dad was born in Puerto Rico, and then at some point in his like teenage years, kind of the typical story of they moved to New York. Had some family out there for better opportunities, maybe for work and things like that financially. So he lived out there for a while as a teenager as well. Then I think he moved back late teens, early 20s, and then eventually meeting my mom and living in New York throughout the course of his 20s until they moved into Jersey.
Excellent. I know you mentioned, and like I said, we'll talk about it probably in a few, your podcast, Life as a Gringo, especially in the early episodes. So people, if you're out there, listen to those early episodes. They're awesome.
Yeah.
There was a conversation with your parents, and you talk about how your dad calling you and your mom were New Yoricans, and there was a difference between him and being from the island, being born on and raised and then come over from the island. What did this look like in your household in Jersey? Was there a noticeable culture difference between what your father wanted to do in the household and what your mother wanted to do around traditions, religion, and things like that?
I don't know if it was super deep in that way. I think it was one of those weird things where it was like half joking, but like, but also very much a distinction of being, sort of born and raised over there. I don't know. I think my dad, he definitely was, very influential as far as like politically teaching me things about the island, about really making it a point for me to have a sense of pride about the island, right? Where I think if I was born to, somebody who was born and raised in New York, just like my mom, I think we would still be proud Puerto Ricans, but I don't think I would have a real sort of main tie to it in the same way that I do now, where I really do feel like it is home when I go back there, and we grew up very much so it feeling that way when we went every summer and things like that, because he was from there, because he sort of was able to navigate it locally, and we had so much family and a house over there and things like that. So I think that's probably the biggest distinction if I think about it in terms of like maybe other people that I know from New York who are also Puerto Rican, where I think there was maybe a greater sense of pride just because he was from there. I think the one thing I would say that is interesting to me, that as I like think about it, as you're asking me that, I did sort of witness my father always longing to be back over there, you know what I mean? Feeling like he was missing something. So I think that's a really has a profound impact on me in retrospect, when I just think about how much the island means to him and all of that stuff, So I think that was probably maybe one of the main differences. I think my mom is very much a proud Puerto Rican, but there's just a different level of I think the depth to it when you talk about how my father is versus her.
Yeah. What type of impact do you think that it had on you back then? Did you realize it really back then when you were young that your father always talked about this place or longed for this other place?
I think, it became more of like a joke almost for us, because he would complain about traffic in New Jersey and talk about he's just going to go back to Puerto Rico, or he'd complain about the winters or whatever it was, right? But I think now as an adult, when you really, sort of think about it on a much deeper level, it's really somebody, I think, making a distinction of that place is always home. That is their safe space. You know what I mean? That is sort of the place that kind of calls to their heart, unlike anything else. And I think that there is something beautiful about that. And also there's something, I think, there's got to be a part of him that probably feels a little bit tortured not being there almost. You know what I mean? And sort of not living there every day. I think my father is probably his happiest when he is there. You know what I mean? It's like the things that might bother him over here aren't so bad, when we're over there. So I think Yeah, I think as an adult, when you think about it, there's like, man, there's definitely probably a part of him that he feels like he left behind when they started this life over here.
Yeah. I love that where you say, like that felt home to him, like that was his comfort
Yeah.
zone. So,
Yeah, yeah.
how were you raised at home as far as like language? Were you speaking Spanish at home?
No, but ironically, both my mother and father are fluent in Spanish, and can both, read, write, and speak Spanish, and would talk to each other in Spanish, but they would talk to myself and my sister in English. So really the only reason why I know any Spanish that I do now, which I can understand it, pretty fluently, and I can, get by speaking it when I do go back to Puerto Rico and things like that. That's because of my grandmother, who would spend time with us throughout the summers usually, or throughout the school year. I can't remember which she flipped in. I think it was throughout the school year she would stay with us. But yeah, so she didn't speak great English, so we always had this kind of running joke of I would teach her English and she would teach me Spanish. So that was like our relationship, and she was like a big maternal figure for me in my life. So that's the reason why I can understand it, and why I'm able to speak what I can is because of everything she taught me when it comes to that. But if it wasn't for her, I would be pretty much clueless. Like my sister is far worse in speaking Spanish than I am, because she just didn't spend as much time with my grandmother as I did as a young kid.
Did your parents give you a reason why they didn't? Was the idea of being assimilated into the culture that you were living in, was that part of the conversation? Probably not when you were younger, but maybe as you were growing older, they maybe admitted to that.
Yeah, I don't know if it was as conscious for them when it came to the language. There were other things, as far as like the type of haircut. I couldn't get like a Caesar haircut with the skin fade, which was like popular, New York haircut during the time, because they didn't want me to be like sort of labeled as something other in school or things like that, which is, I guess, their own internalized racism as a result of being fearful of people judging them. But I don't know if it was as conscious for them. I think to a degree, like, yeah, they wouldn't have wanted me to have Spanish as my first language, because they knew that it would provide, a bit more of an obstacle for me when it came to school and work and things like that in the future. But yeah, I don't think they even really realized it. I think in their mind it was just, for whatever reason, they just sort of maybe they were assimilating themselves a little bit as well. But yeah, it was never really like this topic of conversation. Even now, I don't think they've ever really given me like a straight answer. It was just kind of one of those things that they sort of just spoke to us in English, and that was that.
Yeah, and one of the things that it's toughest to get into with these conversations, because just even unraveling the multicultural part, the multiracial part, and then looking at the evolution of, your parents, your father moving, your mother being here, and the evolution of what that then creates is a whole other blast, So, what did your childhood look like at school? Did you think about, like, do you remember like an earliest time when you thought about, oh, wait a second, like my culture is different than the people I'm surrounded by?
I think once I started going to school in Jersey, it became very obvious to me. I think when I was doing elementary school in the Bronx, you're just surrounded by black and brown, basically the entire, anybody who was white was a minority there, or other culture were a minority, so it was very normal that majority of my classmates were black or Latin. So I never really saw a difference, and I think the beauty of that school system was we really celebrated, cultures, and, Black History Month was a big deal. And, we would put on plays where, we would, like, I played a Taino Indian in a play at my elementary school, growing up. So like, obviously as a kid, you're not really aware of how amazing that is. But yeah, in retrospect, if we were all very much represented. Now, when I started going to school in New Jersey, yeah, there was definitely then more distinctions to be made. I was a minority at that point, and I think then you begin to sort of recognize, to everybody you're Mexican, right? That's their distinction. It's that sort of mindset that anybody who's Latin is Mexican, or people would sort of take notice that like my dad had an accent, so that would be like a joke. So those were like little things where it was like, oh, people are recognizing this otherness here that I didn't really even think twice about before, because it was just like a normal thing,
Yeah.
So I think that, and even as I'm like going through a train of thought on it, I think even when it came to like dressing a certain way, like I can remember like my friend in Jersey who was like my next door neighbor, at that time, like Vans or Airwalk sneakers, like the skateboarding sneakers, were really big. And I wanted a pair of those, but like my mom was like, "You're gonna get made fun of when you go to school in New York wearing those," So like there was like this, I guess, this distinction of like there are cultural differences, But yeah, I don't think I really was like aware of it until I started going to school in New Jersey. Then it was kind of like, oh, you're kind of like got to pick a side almost.
Yeah. And maybe this is a little bit more of a sensitive question, but were there biases? I know that even within cultures like Latinx culture or Hispanic culture, there are biases towards other countries or groups in that. Was there a bias, or what did it look like when maybe you came home and you said, "Oh, somebody thinks I'm a Mexican," or what did that look like?
Yeah, I think the harsh truth is, and I hope, I think it's getting better, but there are internalized sort of racist ideologies that happen within our own community as the Latin community. I mean, we're a very broad, diverse group of people, so there is a caste system that tends to happen between particular groups or stereotypes or whatever it might be. And I think when it comes to like somebody saying like that you're Mexican, they weren't where I grew up. The term Mexican was almost like a bad word, like a slur. You know what I mean? It wasn't used in the context of like, oh, we're just confused. Like we think this is what your culture is. Mm-hmm. It was like it was genuinely meant to be negative. You know what I mean? Wow. When somebody said you're a Mexican, right? That was used to put you down. So I think yeah, that definitely. Growing up, there was this negative connotation around the idea of being Mexican, or the way people used it towards you. And then I think, yeah, you have some old world ideologies, from parents or older generations where they have their own internalized racism that was sort of normalized growing up for them, that then you kind of as an adult begin to unlearn and recognize it as well as being something negative.
And how did your parents react when you came home after, maybe an incident where you faced prejudice or some other negative bias towards you?
I think so. I was a bit of a pain in the ass as a kid, so I think there was always an assumption that it was my fault when something happened, which was probably rightfully so. But I can't actually remember, in an instance where, I was being targeted by a couple teachers, and specifically a couple teachers, and then, some of the administrators. I mean, like they had made me sign some document admitting to something, right, without my parents being there. And then they basically held this meeting after school, and they had made my mom come in, and for the first time, I felt like my mom really was like, no, something is off here. And she like went in on them and, used all of her information as a teacher to put these people in their place. Like, first of all, you can't have a minor signing documents without his parent being here. So I don't know what the hell you guys are doing. But she basically checked all of them, and I think that was, one of those times where I think years later we've had conversations where she felt like I was being targeted, as opposed to the other kids in the class who were basically doing the same thing as me at that point, So I think definitely those kind of things. And I think even, so that with being called a Mexican or something like that, when it's used as a racial slur, I think, yeah, then those sort of things of the pride of being Puerto Rican and things like that, would come into play as far as like, my father or something like that, or I don't know if I'm trying to think of like what the word not wording would be proper, but like the reaction that he would have. I mean, he probably was just as annoyed. Like he was probably more annoyed than I was. You know what I'm saying? So like, I think there never was like this conversation. I think of like, oh, this is how you deal with it. But like, I think they definitely were probably annoyed by it, or were a little. What was the wording? They were a little triggered by it as well. But yeah, there wasn't like some like lesson of how to deal with it, I don't think either. I think they were just figuring out as they went along as well.
Okay. I was wondering if there was, because one of the things we try to talk about is also now we're living in a time where there's so many tools and resources, podcasts and other things where parents can listen to this and hear similarities, but then be like, oh, this parent reacted in this way. But yeah, sometimes it's just, like there's just not the tools at the time. We haven't, evolved as far as being able to handle that at the time. So
yeah, I think that's. I mean, and this was like their first, this is their first house, in the suburbs or whatever. So I think they were like navigating it just as much as I was, and and kind of didn't have all the answers or the tools, or again, I was a pain in the ass, so we don't know. So I think there was also a question of how much of this is him being targeted, or is he really bringing sort of some of this negative attention upon himself. I think more than anything, their probably strategy was like for me to fit in more than sort of stand up for myself in that way, which I think is sort of what then leads to me years later sort of having to reclaim my authenticity and things like that, because I think that probably was more of the defense strategy, was like you just need to fit in more and act like everybody else essentially.
And you say the school was pretty diverse. Was the neighborhood, did it have similar diversity in the suburbs, or did it shift to a much higher population demographic of non-BIPOC? And did you see your parents, I know it's a lot of questions, but did you see your parents subjected to any type of prejudice or racism in the neighborhood that stuck out?
Yeah, so I think first part of that, it was a primarily Italian, Irish, and Polish neighborhood. So there was, not a ton of diversity. I mean, it wasn't, I also can't say that it was strictly just like white people, but it was far more segregated to a degree, where I think kind of like in your typical like high school or movie or coming of age movie where it's like the jocks and the cheerleaders, right? I think it was like, yeah, like in our school it was like the black kids hung together, the Latin kids hung together, the Asian kids hung together, the Indian kids hung together. So it, and obviously like you were friends and cool with everybody for the most part. It wasn't like this hostile environment, but it was like everybody kind of had like a home base almost, and for me, I think the Latin kids there didn't embrace me, so my home base was like the white kids, and then I think the latter half of your question, like my parents dealing with racism or things like that. There was definitely like I remember one instance with like a neighbor where she was like annoyed, and this one I was like a little bit older, but like she was annoyed that like we were parking a car like on it wasn't even in front of her house, but like whatever, she was annoyed that that we were parking a car on the street, and she like was like yelling at me about parking my car there, and like was claiming that I had like 10 people living in my house or something like that, which was like not even the case. A, it's not her business, but B, that wasn't the case. So it was like that was obviously like a racist trope of hers.
Sure.
That like, oh, of course these Latin people have 1 million people living in their house or whatever. So that was like one. And then I think more so like dealing with like police and things like that in the area. It definitely was like seemed like like I remember one of my friends who is Puerto Rican, when we like first got our license, like, you know, he was driving a Mercedes, and like we would get pulled over just because they were like, this doesn't look like it should be your car type of thing. You know, so little things like that, I guess, you know, which again at the time I didn't even realize was like we were really being targeted. But like my parents, like when I heard them having a conversation about it, it was like, oh, that's why they're, you know, pulling him over, is because he's some Latin kid driving a Mercedes, and how could this be his car type of thing. Little stuff like that, I think yeah, was definitely like around, and that they had to deal with it. I guess I wasn't privy to until I was like a teenager and a little bit more aware of it.
Sure. And as a teenage Dramos, it sounds like you said your social group tended to lean more toward the white kids.
Yeah, because I mean, you know, the Latin kids would sort of accuse me of talking white or being white, you know, and I think they were sort of existing in the trope of sort of like hip hop culture and things like that, where that was like the only way to speak if you were a person of color, you know, and even like, you know, some of the black kids who were into like things like anime or whatever, like they were accused of being white, right? Like the kids who are accused of being nerdy or whatever it is, like those are just tropes that like exist, you know. So it was one of those things where it was like, yeah, I didn't really feel like I completely fit in, and not to say that like, again, I had any issues or anything like that. I think I was one of those people who was pretty much cool with everybody. But like, if you looked at my circle of close friends who I saw on a regular basis, you know, they were primarily white.
And similar, I mean, I grew up in Wyoming, so like I didn't really have an option besides it.
Yeah.
But looking back now, do you see what we call now microaggressions happening between you and your boys? You know, like, you know, looking back, you know, the groups that you hung with.
Yeah, I think I don't know. It's I don't know. It's interesting. I think there was some maybe racism, or I'm careful to use that word because I think intention matters, but I think there was definitely some ignorance on their part to what potentially could be offensive, as well as sort of not seeing my perspective, you know, and not understanding why I might feel differently, or why I might feel a different, or why I might feel a type of way, you know. I think and I think that, again, you're a kid, you're not really aware of it. It just kind of like is a part of it. I mean, but they, you know, even like the white kids would try to tell me that like, oh, you're a fake Puerto Rican or whatever, like whatever this means, right? Because everybody had their own sort of idea of what a Puerto Rican looked like and sounded like, you know. And then even now, years later, as an adult, as I've become more outspoken, you know, I've had friends that I grew up with sort of have those microaggressions, or sort of accuse me of like claiming some sort of victimhood in it, because, and they think just because we grew up on the same block that my experience was exactly the same as theirs, right? And I think that's a bit of where that ignorance kind of comes into play, where, you know, it's not necessarily like malicious, but it's also, you know, it's ignorant and you know, still hurtful nonetheless.
Where do you think you saw the first kind of coming out of Dramos as this person who is recognizing that, you know, you're raised in this one culture that's different than, you know, the culture of your parents, and you start to get curious about it? Do you remember when that was?
As far as like my wanting to embrace, you know, and be a little bit more involved in my community?
Yes.
I mean, I it was a really long process, like a slow process, you know. I think I don't know what, you know, I think, I hate to say it, I mean, it really wasn't that long ago almost, when I really think about it. It really was like, I think once I started getting more involved in radio and at the Breakfast Club, that was probably more of a turning point, you know, for me. And which again is like, you know, we're talking about like Trump's first term, so really not that long ago, you know. So I mean, you know, we're talking 2016-ish, you know. So I think I had my own internal narrative that I was telling myself, right, where on one hand, I was proud to be Puerto Rican. I didn't hide it. I didn't try to like pretend like, I still, wore things with a Puerto Rican flag, as any proud Puerto Rican does. But like, I didn't really understand, sort of what I was lacking as well when it comes to like really embracing the culture, right? Because I would come up with, narratives in my mind as far as like, why I wasn't more involved in my community, right? I think there was this resentment of not being embraced, or even as like a single young man, like I would tell myself I'm not attracted to Latin women because they remind me of my family or whatever, right? And that was me having a defense mechanism, where because I was shunned by Latin women growing up, that like then I just kind of flipped the narrative in my head where it was like, well, I don't even like them anyway, right? And I think then sort of being at the Breakfast Club, and because even when I first started radio, I was at pop stations, and I was again around mostly white people, but then going to the Breakfast Club, and it's a show that's like unapologetically black. I just saw the sense of pride that they had, and it really sort of like showed me what I was missing almost, you know what I mean? The connection to my community. And then, all the nonsense with Trump, and then, Hurricane Maria hitting Puerto Rico and really devastating the island. That was sort of my like come to Jesus moment where I was watching it on the news, and I just like felt something inside of me just completely change and like want to, get back to my roots almost in some sort of way. But I think, that was sort of a very long and slow process. And then Maria was probably like the big kind of hit. And then, from there, I don't know, it was a really slow evolution. And again, just getting more comfortable with my voice. When I saw, the Breakfast Club and all them being unapologetic about their views, and they're fighting for visibility and things like that in the black community, it allowed me to become more and more comfortable with embracing my own stuff, and wanting to advocate as well, wanting to be that representation as much as I could be as well.
Yeah, that's beautiful, man. And I love that about your podcast too, because you're very open about your journey and about the work that you've done. Can you share a little bit about that journey that you just mentioned and what was involved in that unraveling of this self-identity to where you are today?
I mean, it's just like, it's being more and more comfortable with being vulnerable, and it's incredibly difficult, because these are things have been taught to be embarrassed about, you know what I mean? Like, not fitting in, like it's embarrassing to not fit into your community and to speak about those types of things, right? Like for me, I would sort of rather have, I don't know, like code switching, really, like code switching would happen, and to sort of own the fact that I have this otherness within my own community, and to speak about how it hurt me, that was a exercise in vulnerability. And I think probably, I think I just kept slowly just peeling back more and more layers, and I think I was blessed that I was starting to get a little bit of an audience from the Breakfast Club Association, and that I had that feedback loop happening, particularly like during the pandemic. I was doing a lot of like Instagram lives, and I started just like seeing that when I was doing talking about things that made me cringe about myself, or that made me embarrassed, or whatever it was, I saw that it was resonating with people, right? And I was getting like positive feedback, and I think, that really began to like give me the okay to kind of be like, oh, I should explore this more, because it is resonating with people. Ironically, it's giving me, the bits of success that I had been searching for, the more honest I'm being. And I think, that's why I'm forever grateful to anybody that, supports me, but also particularly during that time period, because I think that group of people who was riding with me during that time, like really for the first time allowed me to like be brave and be vulnerable and really just show up as authentic as I was capable of in that moment, which is like has allowed me to really create the life that I have now. So I think it's just slowly peeling back the layers and just talking, right? Like saying the hard stuff out loud. I mean,
Yeah.
Even this conversation around like how late in life I feel like I found, my authenticity or my attachment to culture, like I still feel a little bit embarrassed about
Sure.
that. But I think it's again, the more you sort of challenge yourself to speaking about it, I think as with anything in life, the better you are at communicating, you're going to have stronger relationships or better quality relationships in your life that actually are fulfilling, rather than sort of just like surface level, where you don't have to actually dig anything up or connect in any sort of deep way.
Yeah, yeah. I think that, just your introspection though is a gift. Just what, the way you explained it is that a lot of people don't either have that awareness or come to terms with the idea they're multicultural or
Hmm.
other things, and they don't share with the therapist or with
Yeah.
others in a way that gets them to think about like, wow, this had an impact on my life. So I appreciate the space that you've created in your on your podcast, and in the Just Be Club. I'm going to take one quick step back, which is
Yeah.
you talk about in some of your early podcasts about the way you wanted to go professionally, which was you wanted to get into music. It wasn't something that your parents you felt supported you on.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about that journey to through wanting to do music into the profession you're at now, and how what your parents did impacted what you thought you could do as a Latinx individual.
Yeah, I think, my parents, like any other parent, they want the best for you. They want you to have the easier route, the pathway to success. And like we know, we've all been sold this dream of the white picket fence American dream type of thing in college and all that kind of stuff, and get a good job in a traditional space. So I think that was sort of what was expected, and I think they had their own limiting beliefs. My father in particular, came from a poor background, a single mother of three boys, and for her greatest goal was just to make sure that she helped them get through college so they could get a job, and that was a success. So I think for him there was sort of a lot of limiting beliefs around that, and that was sort of passed down onto me, this idea that anybody who's successful or wealthy, generally speaking, was born into money or born into connections, right? Neither of which I had, right? So
Yeah.
so it was impossible for me to find that. And I think all of that tied into then the idea that like I'm trying to do this route that is particularly difficult in general, that they've never seen anybody find success in. And I think their own fears are sort of what pushed them to create certain narratives or to not support it completely. And to their credit, it's not like I also have to like give them credit where there was never like this ultimatum where it was like either you go to college or we're kicking you out of the house type of thing. Like I never had to worry about that, and that's a level of privilege not a lot of people can also say, right? Like I always knew I had a place to sleep and food, and things like that. So to their credit, there was that, but I think I was always a kid who thought about things a little bit differently than those around him, and that's probably what also got me into trouble. And I think for them, a lot of their parenting was like a comparison game to me or my friends, and be like, oh, so and so isn't doing that, why are you doing that, right? And I think that begins to like instill in a kid where it's like, oh, I need to be more like this person, or there's something wrong with me because I'm thinking of things differently, right? Whereas now I think I'm not a parent yet, but knowing what I know from my own situation, if I'm seeing a kid that is incredibly intelligent but like is having problems in school, or like but has other interests, rather than like punishing him, what's the motivator I can give that kid to like be able to dive more into his interests but like also get the result that I want, right? So not like punishing him, but saying like, hey, if you are don't get in trouble at school, we'll help you with this interest that you have, and you can do that on the weekends or whatever, which again, like they did that to a degree, but it was, I think for me, I was searching for a cosign of somebody to believe that I could do something different, not just appeasing me because I wanted to do it, but also have a belief that I was good enough to do it, and I think, again, their own ignorance to the fields that I was interested in, particularly music growing up. Like, I don't think they recognized my talent or my skill or something like that, right? To them, it was just kind of whatever. And they sort of always needed an outside person to co-sign, like, oh, he's actually good at what he's doing, right? And then they would be like, oh, maybe I should look at this a different way. Like, I could, like, for me, when I was playing drums as a kid, I remember like going into Guitar Center and I would play around the drum kits, and like, you know, there was a couple times where I would get like a crowd around me watching me play, and that was like the first time my parents like, oh, I think he's actually like not, you know, he actually might be decent at this, you know, this thing, right? And it was like the first time they acknowledged that, right? Which, you know, again, it's not like these aren't, you know, incredibly traumatic stories on the surface, but they do add to this sort of narrative in your own mind of like, man, like I'm not being seen by those closest to me, you know? So I think that's probably a lot of the, you know, sort of the groundwork for my journey in that. And then, you know, the music stuff, it eventually, as I graduated high school, I was sort of in and out of college for a while, and I was, you know, pursuing music as being in a band, and we were touring, and everything was like very DIY. So it was like booking our own shows through MySpace or on tours and things like that. I wasn't making any money, but we were building towards this bigger dream. My parents didn't get it, of course, you know, and I think for me, then the pathway eventually became one of rebellion, where I'm going to prove them wrong, you know, which was a great sort of motivator. Now at this point in my life where I'm at now, I sort of see the negative aspects of it because it created a lot of resentment towards them for a while. You know, I think like oftentimes when you have that I'm going to prove you wrong mentality, it is great, it is powerful in its own way, but it also is like dirty fuel almost, you know what I mean? Where it's like it's not, it might get you to where you want to be, but like, you know, it's not going to fulfill you in the way that you really need to be happy. You know, you're gonna have to do some self-work after the fact, you know. So yeah, that was kind of the journey of music, and you know, from playing in bands to then becoming a DJ, and then, you know, meeting people on radio and all of that sort of transition, you know. Throughout the entire course of that, they really didn't get it or understand it probably until like I think until I bought my house, like 3 years ago at this point. It was like when they were like, oh, I think this is actually like a real thing for him now, you know? So yeah, so that it's been just a weird ride of that.
Yeah. No, I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I wish, I don't know, you might maybe be on the fringe of being able to have like actual videos of you playing the drums in the music store, right? You know?
Oh yeah.
It'd be cool to see.
Yeah, I think I don't know if I have any from back then, but there's definitely like old videos from me and my band and stuff like that of playing drums and,
that's awesome.
Playing shows. Yeah.
And so you mentioned a couple of things. I love the word dirty fuel, the words dirty fuel you use. I love that. I'm going to probably co-opt that and use that.
Sure.
It's great. And also talking about approval. I don't know if, you know, you mentioned it wasn't, you know, these don't sound traumatic, but I don't think approval from our parents has to be as harsh as our parents telling us we ain't worth anything, to being more of those unconscious, just non-recognition types of approval that happen to a lot of people. And just a lot of parents just aren't in that space. I mean, I'm familiar with that. You know, your story sounds very, very similar in that way to mine. So Oh, go ahead.
No, I mean, I think I definitely want to sort of piggyback on that, because I think you're right. I think approval, especially as a kid, man, because this is like, you know, when you're all that we do, you know, and like the career path that I have is a series of risks, you know, and I think what happens to a lot of people, like a lot of people I talk to don't ever even start because they're scared of taking that risk, you know, and it's because they never got that cosign for the most part of like, no, you're talented, you're skilled, you could really do whatever you put your mind to, and truly, you know, somebody actually really believed that, you know. And I'm lucky that like the rebellion was strong enough in me that I was able to push past those fears and that self-doubt. But it still followed me throughout the entire, you know, course of my career until this day. It's still something I struggle with, is, you know, really believing that I am good at what I do, or that I am worthy just as much as anybody else, or not making myself smaller in rooms with people that I respect because I don't feel like I deserve to be there, right? That's still something I struggle with. And it is because I didn't get that reinforcement of like people recognizing my skill or my talent, you know, until again after the fact, when I actually found success already and the outside world confirmed it for them, that is when they sort of were able to see it, right? And that is sort of, I think, probably what took me so long to get to a place of really being able to live in my authenticity. And it's still something I, again, struggle with till this day of taking out that wiring that still exists in there somewhere.
And so looking back, being that child that you just explained that still, lives inside of us in one way or another, until we pass, what would you say to parents as far as, hey, here's a recommendation. I went the resentment path, and that was dirty fuel. Like, it was no good for anyone. What would you say to parents, your parent, maybe even just your parents, dealing with you as that child nowadays? How would you want to be handled, do you think? Or what do you think is a proper way to handle that child?
I think, recognizing just like the intuitiveness of human beings, even kids, right? They already kind of know what they're into. And even if they want to try a million things, like, I think you have to respect when they're passionate about something, right? And you don't have to understand it. It's not all for you to understand, and doesn't have to have this pathway, that is, straight and easy to sort of see where it ends up. I think also understanding that, like, life is while it's short, it's also incredibly long. You don't have to have it all figured out, in your 20s or whatever it is, right? And I think that's also part of the issue, is thinking like we're all in this rush, and like you have to have it figured out by 18 years old and then go to school for it and, whatever. I think just having a little bit more patience. I think, again, if your kid is like naturally devoting their time to something and really going in on it, I think you have to, in whatever way you can, help them harness that and push them to really explore that interest. You know what I mean? And I think for me, in looking back, if I was able to like go back and just like coach my parents throughout during certain times of my life, I would be like, yeah, you don't get it, but look at your kid is literally like on the internet doing research on the music business by himself for like hours on end. You know what I mean? He's watching every documentary on artists. He's like learning things. Or when I got into like DJing and producing music, I was, from the time they went to bed till my mom woke up to get ready for work in the morning, I was working on music, and there were times I was doing that on the weekends. And it's like, I would be like, oh, my son who's 21 years old is staying in on a Friday night to work on music. Like, that's a little bit different. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, for sure.
I should give some sort of encouragement there, or acknowledgement. Like, I don't get it, but like, I see you're really passionate about this. You're working hard at this sort of thing, So I think that sort of are little things that can give a kid confidence to really believe they can sort of make something happen, and I would even encourage, like, even if it's like, hey, you don't get it completely, I would support that and find ways where it's like, if somebody like me who hated school and was sort of just getting by because they had zero interest in being there, have a real conversation. Like, I get it. I don't understand. This isn't for you. You don't like it. But what can I do to sort of make sure you're doing what you have to get done? And then we support you in the things that actually interest you, That's sort of what I think my methodology would be, as I sort of think back to, what mistakes were made or what could have been better. And I think I'm also blessed with like the idea that I'm doing it where I have the perspective of somebody who actually made what seemed impossible happen, so I know it's possible as long as you put in the hard work, right? So I think I have a privilege there where I actually can like genuinely believe people can bring things, ideas to life and be successful, because I've seen it happen for myself. Whereas with my parents, who took a more traditional route, I think that was a little bit more difficult for them to visualize.
Yeah, that was great. Great. Thank you so much. You just mentioned hard work. I know that a lot of times as a Latinx individual, Hispanic individual, we attach hard work to like a cultural thing. Do you feel that you've ever now because you went the route of an entrepreneur and not the traditional route of going to school, which going to school is tough. I mean, I went that route too, But the entrepreneur route, a lot less certainty, I think, going that route. Do you feel that idea of, the cultural connection to hard work being Latinx has affected you negatively or positively?
I think it's sort of hard work in the sense of like, actual grueling work is more what I'm thinking of when I hear it, right? I think that's far more of the connotation I'm familiar with, the idea of like work is supposed to suck, you're just supposed to do it and get by type of thing, you know? And I think that normalization probably was what I was more hyper aware of, and what really caused me to rebel was like seeing my dad miserable, you know, busting his ass each day, coming home from work tired and things like that. That had a big influence on me as far as like my rebellion, where it was like I never want to do that or fall into what I saw as a trap, you know, where it was like you're working this job that you hate, and you have no choice because it's what you have to do to sort of provide, you know, because you have responsibilities, you know what I mean? So I think for me, that sort of hard work in the sense of like keep your head down and just, you know, collect a check, that had a profound effect on me as me seeing it as the polar opposite of what I wanted for my life.
Wow, that's great. That's great awareness. Let's get into life as a gringo. So that was born out of your desire to, you know, to investigate your multiculturalism, bring more representation to life for that. Tell us a little bit about Life as a Gringo and the Just Be Club that you formed out of that.
Yeah, so Life as a Gringo is my baby. It's my first podcast of me on my own. But you know, it was conceptualized basically of this idea of living in the gray area, you know, of the idea of not being like Latin enough for your family back home, but then you know, sort of being other when you were in a white environment, you know, and sort of the feeling that you don't actually exist anywhere, you know, and I use the word gringo because that's what I would be called by like family back home, essentially back in Puerto Rico, I should say, you know. So it's just me really like, you know, owning my otherness and sort of like a subtle middle finger to that distinction, you know what I mean? And yeah, so that's sort of the I don't know, the first real thing I went off on my own. Originally it was a book idea. It wasn't even a podcast idea. I was just like thinking of a book I wanted to write. And then when I sort of got into this space of a Latin podcast network being started at iHeartRadio, who I have a partnership with, and as I was preparing to kind of get in a meeting with them, Life as a Gringo was actually my second pitch. It wasn't even the first one I went with. Ironically, and it was sort of just like on a whim, let me just see if they like this idea. So yeah, that was really just me trying to tackle the idea of otherness, and I think it was like me for the first time. That was really my coming out party of me just standing on my own 2 feet of like, this is who I am, like hate it or love it, right? And that's why the name is a bit polarizing in general for people, because it is just me sort of just like, you know, being okay with people not liking it or not liking me or not understanding it, whatever it is, right? It's sort of polarizing by design almost. So that's that, and then, you know, it's sort of just become this sort of audio diary, if you will, of a person just growing and trying to be better and trying to be a positive contributor to their community, you know, and trying to share the lessons they're learning along the way, and to invite other people on who are experts in their own field or who have gone through similar journeys of their own, and you know, have interesting stories to share with others to inspire them at the end of the day, you know. So that's basically Life as a Gringo in a nutshell. And then, you know, from there, you know, the really, you know, the reality is once you kind of start doing this type of stuff, you always want to go deeper and deeper, you know. And for me, it was like I wanted to connect with people beyond just sort of speaking you know, into what feels like the great abyss sometimes, right? I record in a room by myself, you know, and I don't know how people are receiving it generally, right? You get some like cool comments and stuff like that, but like, you know, I'm not there to see people's reaction in real time. I don't know exactly who's being affected by it or what you know is resonating in real time. And also, you know, especially kind of in the virtual world that we exist in now, for me, it was like, man, I really want to be a part of something. I want to, you know, create what I've been looking for. So that's when I kind of went a bit deeper and was like, let me create, you know, just be a sort of a wellness brand of my own, but then extend it into having a community side of it where, you know, I can use the lessons that I've been learning and share them with others to hopefully inspire them on their journey. But at the same time, just create a safe space for those of us who feel the same way, maybe live in this otherness or are just growth minded in general, to sort of have other people that you can lean on, or just that remind you that, like, we're all on like this journey, or remind you that, you're not crazy for wanting more out of your life or whatever it is, Really, I was inspired by the book Think and Grow Rich, where they talk about creating a mastermind. And I don't know anybody for the most part, personally in my own inner circle, that's as sort of growth minded or relates in that way. So the Just Be Social Club is also me finding that community that I've been starving for as well.
That's great. You have a pretty motivational TED Talk too. What is your TED Talk about?
Yeah, I did a talk where it's the idea really of authenticity and the need for disruption by being authentic. Like the idea that progress itself only comes from people who are willing to disrupt what is the norm, and that the only way we're going to see change and create all that we're looking for is if we sort of stop looking or stop waiting for someone else to do it, and we sort of allow ourselves to become that driving force in our own way. And I think we're all sort of searching for a better world, one where we can feel more comfortable, where we're our community is being held in the regard that it deserves. And it starts with all of us sort of being unafraid to use our voices and to stand tall and loud and be unapologetically who we are at the end of the day, and I think the tagline from it that continues to kind of, I guess anybody who's watched it and kind of knows a bit about that talk is when I said authenticity is your superpower, and that's sort of, I think, probably the best way I could summarize that talk and what it was all about. It's really me sharing my own story of how when I embraced who I really was, I found all the success I've ever been searching for, so let that be an inspiration, a motivation, and a lesson for anybody out there that, all that they're searching for in this life is going to be the result of how authentically they show up.
I love it. I love the thesis of authenticity, and I still see so many people not being authentic. And it's tough, man. It's really, really, really tough, What do you feel like the evolving narrative of Latinx or multicultural Latinx? What do you think that's going to look like in the coming years, and how do you hope to shape it?
I think it's kind of like a two-headed monster, right? Because it's like similar we were talking about before, where it's there's a lot of internalized racism from previous generations and things like that. So I think what's beautiful about conversations like this one, platforms like this one, and kind of the greater dialogue that's happening even just within our own community, is there is this focus on diverse voices within the community, understanding that not one person speaks for all of us, understanding that certain people like Afro-Latinos were left out of the conversation and haven't had the representation, the voice that they deserve, So I think us as a community, as a culture, coming to terms with a bit of those harder conversations is a beautiful thing. And then I think on the grander sort of scale of it all, I think, we're starting to see, I think, I don't know if it's number 2 or number 1. I can't remember what the statistic was, but it was something like, Spanish language music is like the fastest growing genre of music out there right now. Yeah. According to like Spotify, it's like I don't even remember if it was the most streamed genre of music, but there was some sort of stat that came out. But I love using that as sort of a litmus test for the world that we live in, because I think those sort of numbers are not just a reflection of like Latin people listening, but it's everybody listening to it, right? Like Bad Bunny isn't as big of an artist as he is just because he has a large Latin fan base. It's because he has fans that don't even speak Spanish who just love the music, right? And I think that openness to experiencing and embracing something that is not necessarily your culture, but still being able to see the value and appreciate the value in it, I think is a beautiful sort of testament to the ever-changing world that we're in right now. And as for as much negativity as there is, and as much work as there is to be done, I think someone like him transcending into this mega star that he is while still doing just music in Spanish, I think showcases sort of our potential to be existing on that mainstream level, even staying honest and true in our own language if we felt like doing so. I think it's an idea of like we don't have to change who we are to find success, right? And seeing somebody do it on that grand of a level, I think, to me, is a great sort of symbolization of the potential of us really being a part of these conversations, and not just being a part of them, but doing so authentically, and then also doing so from a position of power as well, right? Because we are proving the sort of not only just value, but I think our ability to participate at this sort of high level, and I think the willingness of other people to embrace it as well, if that makes sense.
It's an excellent example too. Thank you for sharing that. What are some resources that you're using now, books, podcasts, shows or other things that you're utilizing besides maybe therapy or other things to go deeper within yourself? And with that, I think the question would be, you mentioned the idea of, I just mentioned about not speaking the language, and I could feel a little bit of shame rising up. Like, what would you say to somebody who just doesn't even go for it just because of that feeling comes up?
Well, I think to answer that question first, I think you're only shortchanging yourself at the end of the day, and I think it's like as with anything else, it doesn't have to be culture or language or whatever it is. It's like usually the things that feel the most uncomfortable are going to be the things that have the greatest impact on your life, right? So even for me, like I just came back from Puerto Rico. I go a few times a year now. And when I'm there, I always challenge myself to try and primarily just speak in Spanish, And there are times where I might embarrass myself, where I can't answer a specific thing, the way I want to, or like it comes out broken or whatever it is. But like I just keep challenging myself to do it, and I'm getting better at Spanish in my vocabulary and my capability of holding a conversation. And I feel good, like I feel more confident in myself as a result of that, But it's me being willing to be embarrassed in a public setting or whatever with a stranger, and pushing past that fear and that discomfort. And I think it brings a greater sense of sort of self-pride for myself, to keep pushing myself to just improve upon things that are important to me. And knowing that if I fall short of it in that moment, doesn't mean I'm lesser than, right? But I'm just learning, I'm trying to grow.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a beauty in that. And I think that bleeds into other aspects of your life when you can push past those fears, and it becomes the idea of like you finding comfort in that discomfort almost, which I think is incredibly powerful. Resources go, it's kind of a twofold thing. I love the idea of bringing things that aren't traditionally from our community to our community. So I am a big like self-help junkie, and primarily those like books or podcasts or whatever are not hosted or written by people who come from our background, but there still is valuable information in that, so I still ingest a lot of that stuff, and like try to read like the classics that everybody talks about, like the Think and Grow Rich and how to Win Friends and Influence People, like all those classic books that everybody always talks about that probably weren't shared in our community, but like the greatest entrepreneurs or people who found great wealth all read those books for a particular reason, right? So I understand the importance of that, and then sort of bringing back that information to the community. And then on the other side of it, also challenging myself to dig deeper into my cultural background and things like that, So like I have a book of like short stories and poetry only written by Puerto Rican authors, so I read that stuff, and that allows me to have a deeper cultural tie. Or I have a book that is like a really extended history of Puerto Rico that I challenge myself to like really read and study up on, just so I can have a deeper tie and a sort of a more I don't know if educational or a more intellectual sort of perspective of my community and my culture have real ties to it in a real way, because so that I can continue to add value when I have these conversations, about what's going on in the world or whatever it might be. So, I think it's a combination of ingratiating myself in the culture and the community as much, and then also trying to be open-minded to learn from things that aren't necessarily norms in our community, like mental health or whatever it might be, with the knowledge that me having that understanding is then now I can sort of digest it and regurgitate it in a way that is going to be, impactful for my community as well.
Yeah. And it's interesting because as you were mentioning these things, one of the things that came up is it's a little bit of a different goal or intention when we're trying to find this other part of our culture or our race or other things. I don't know. At least in my experience, it's not like I, put something up on my vision board or wherever and say, hey, I'm going to be the most Mexican person I can be.
Sure.
It's not like those are the goals. It's interesting how it's a fluid spiritual energy thing where we just are feeling pulled towards something,
Yeah. I think that, that's sort of the beauty of it. I think that's where like the fulfillment comes from. I think that's why we've gone on this journey. I think because we knew something was missing, there was something lacking, and I think there is this natural spiritual otherworldly draw to your ancestry, and I think there's something incredibly powerful of being able to know that you're a part of this sort of long lineage and also be able to trace it back, and I think that there's something that's very, sort of very just good for the soul when you have a sense of pride about where you come from, and sort of are feeling connected to maybe people that you don't even know, right? When you go to Mexico or you go to Puerto Rico or you go wherever your family's from, like I know when I step off the plane in Puerto Rico and I start hearing people speak Spanish, it makes me feel warm inside and I feel connected in some sort of way, right? And I think there's such a beauty to that.
Yeah, it's a wholeness, and I live in Portland, which is a very very non-BIPOC area, and when I flew to New York this last time, man, it was awesome. My heart was so full just getting off, seeing all the beautiful people, all the diversity. The one last question I ask everybody is, what is your vision of world peace? How do we get there?
Yeah, I think I revert back to music. I think in music the same way we can be open to each other's different perspective, right? Or different culture or language or whatever it might be. Like I think that it's a lot more simple than we think that it is. I think it really just comes with empathy. It comes with openness. It comes from recognizing that everybody has some sort of value to bring, and that there's something beautiful about everybody's culture and where they come from. And I think if we were far more open to sort of celebrating the fact that we're different rather than viewing difference as a negative thing, the world would be in a far better place, and I think I think authenticity is a huge part of that. People sort of being unafraid to be themselves would lead to a lot happier people out there, and then on the flip side of that, I think empathy, where we recognize that people are all going through their own things, their own trials and tribulations, and rather than judging people from a surface level, more so trying to think of them as a human being and what could be the reason why they're acting a certain way or why they're doing a certain thing, right? I think a bit more of that would definitely help us have a little bit more peace in this world. So I think authenticity and empathy are probably some of those key components to that recipe of peace, I think.
Excellent. Beautifully spoken. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for Life as a Gringo podcast. I laugh because my late dad's favorite word, growing up in Wyoming, was he used to call everybody Gringo. So I think there's also that connection to it. But thank you for the Just Be Social Club too.
Of course.
And I recommend that everyone checks them out. Check out Dramos' TED Talk. And where can people find you? And what else would you like people to know? And I'm going to share the links and things on the website too. So.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, well, first of all, thank you for having me and thank you for your questions. But at DJ Dramos is pretty much where you can find me on everything. I think, the podcast Life as a Gringo, we're going into season 3, which is crazy. And Just Be, we're just, trying to really build it out. There's a focus on it this year, really growing the Just Be social club into really being beyond just us meeting up, but really a thriving community of people that can come together and share on a consistent basis and, find a home and find inspiration to push past whatever has been holding them back, So just for me, those are the two things I'd really, really push at the end of the day, I think. And on my socials and all that stuff, you'll be able to find all the other stuff that I'm doing and getting out there.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dramos. Have an awesome day.
You too, brother.
Thank you for joining us for the Multiracialverse podcast. My name is Antonio Fernandez. You can find this podcast on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Huge shout out to my friend Johannes Skoda for mixing and creating the intro music, and DJ Kazam for the track.